Montana Territory, late October, 1883, the wind howled across the high plains like it was mourning something long gone, and Willa Prescott had nothing left to offer but her silence, and the baby wrapped tight against her chest. She stepped down from the freight wagon just as the sun cracked through the clouds, her boots hitting the dirt of Dry Creek Station with a thud that felt far too loud. Her dress was torn at the hem, her shawl barely holding on, and her voice, what little she had left, was hoarse from pleading through the night. Her baby stirred, a soft, helpless sound muffled under the thin muslin she had wrapped around him. She turned toward the stable where a man was tightening the cinch on a chestnut gelding. "I do not mean to bother you," she said, her voice raw, "but I need a blanket, just something to keep him warm, anything." The cowboy looked up. He was tall, lean, and sun-browned, with a quiet steadiness in his eyes that did not shift even when the wind whipped his hat clean off his head. He bent down, plucked it up, and stepped toward her. "You walked all the way here?" he asked. "I rode until the driver turned me out," she said. "I had no money left. He said I should be grateful he let me off near a town." He looked at the baby. "How old?" "3 weeks." His jaw moved like he was swallowing something hard. "Come with me." Willa hesitated, but she followed him across the yard to the small cabin tucked near the barn. He opened the door and stepped aside. Inside, "It is warm." She stepped through, and the heat from the stove hit her like a wave. The cabin was neat, the kind of place someone lived alone in for a long time. A cast iron pot simmered on the stove, a rifle hung heavy on the wall. "Sit," he said. "You look like you are about to fall." She did not argue. Her legs folded under her on the chair, and she pulled the baby closer. He went to the trunk at the foot of his bed, pulled out a thick wool blanket, and walked it over to her. "Here." She laid it over her son, her hands shaking. "Thank you." He knelt beside her, looking at the baby. "What is his name?" "Caleb." "Strong name." He looked up at her. "I am Elias Boone. Willa Prescott." "You hungry, Willa?" She nodded, and he brought her a bowl of stew and a cup of water. She ate like someone who had not tasted food in days. She had not. Not really. Elias sat across the room. He said nothing, just watched her like he was trying to understand how a woman ended up here with nothing but a baby and a name. When she finished, she held Caleb to her chest and rocked, slow and gentle. "We were going to Oregon," she said. "My husband died crossing the Snake River. He was washed away." Her voice cracked. "I buried him near Fort Hall." I kept going. "I thought I could make it to my cousin's place near Helena, but the last of my money went to the wagon." Elias sat quiet for a long time. "You can stay here," he said, "just until you are strong enough to ride on." "I do not want to impose." "You are not. You need a roof. The boy needs warmth." "And I got plenty of both." He stood and took off his coat. Then, without a word, he started rolling up a blanket near the fireplace. "What are you doing?" she asked, making a place to sleep. "But it is your bed. You and the baby need it more." She stared at him, unsure how to respond. No man had ever looked at her like that before, not with pity, but with something steadier, something that felt a little like quiet devotion. The hours passed. Elias made supper. Willa fed Caleb. She laid him on the bed and sat beside him, brushing soft fingers over his cheek. "He is warm," she said, more to herself. Elias leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "He will stay that way." She looked up. "Why are you helping me?" He shrugged. "Because someone should. You do not even know me." "I do not have to." They said nothing else that night. Willa lay beside her son under the blanket Elias had given her, the heat of the bed soaking into her bones. She watched Elias from across the room where he had settled onto the floor beside the fire. He did not complain. He did not ask anything from her. And for the first time in days, Willa felt something other than fear. The next morning, Elias was already outside chopping wood when Willa stepped onto the porch. The cold bit at her ankles, but Caleb was warm in her arms. Elias looked up and gave a nod. "Slept all right," she nodded. "I did." She did not tell him that for the first time since her husband died, she had not woken up crying, or that she had slept with her hand resting on her son's chest, and the sound of Elias breathing across the room had made her feel safe. Days passed. Elias never pushed. He gave her space, made sure she had food, and checked on Caleb with a gentleness that surprised her. He built a cradle from scrap pine wood, sanding it smooth until it shined. Willa cried when he gave it to her. "You did not have to," she whispered. He looked at her, his voice quiet. "I wanted to." She began to help where she could, sweeping, cooking what little she could contribute. Sometimes she caught Elias watching her, not like a man who wanted something, but one who saw her, and she started to see him too. He had been alone a long time. She could tell by how he watched the horizon, by how he spoke only when words were needed. But when he smiled, which he did once when Caleb gripped his finger, it lit his whole face. One evening, late in November, the wind howling down from the mountains, Willa stood at the stove stirring soup. Elias was fixing a shutter that had come loose. "You do not have to keep me here," she said softly. "I know winter is coming. I should find somewhere else." Elias set down the hammer and looked at her. "Where would you go?" "I do not know yet." He crossed the room in 3 long strides and stopped just in front of her. "You and Caleb are not a burden." She held his gaze. "Why are you doing this for us?" He looked at her, really looked. "Because when you asked for a blanket for your baby, I saw you. I saw how hard you were trying, how much you had already lost. I would give you anything I had, Willa, and not because I pity you, because I want to take care of you." She could not speak for a second. Her throat felt tight. "I gave you my bed," he said, voice low. "I would give you my name, too, and anything else you need." Her breath caught. "Elias. I know it is fast. I know you are hurting, but I would wait. I would stay beside you as long as you need. I just want to be here." Her eyes filled. "What if I want that too?" He stepped closer, slow and sure, and rested his hand on Caleb's back, his other hand brushing her shoulder. "Then you already have my devotion." The snow arrived slow but steady, softening the edges of the world until everything, roof, field, pine, lay under a hush of white. Willa pressed her palm to the windowpane and watched it fall, her breath clouding the glass. Caleb slept in the cradle Elias had built, bundled in the blanket that still held the scent of pine smoke and wool. Behind her, Elias set a bucket of water near the stove, steam rising faintly from the rim. He'd taken to splitting kindling before first light, stacking it neatly by the hearth before she even stirred. Every motion he made around the cabin had purpose, but never haste. "You ever lived through a mountain winter?" he asked, wiping his hands on his trousers. She turned. "No. Closest I come was Kansas in a bad freeze, but we had neighbors then, a whole town around us." He nodded, tugging his sleeve down over his wrist. "Here it's the wind you have to learn. It'll turn on you when you expect it least." "I'm learning," she said. "I can see that." She walked past him to the fire, kneeling to adjust the pot. "You always live alone out here, since I was 16, she glanced up. "That young?" "My father died in a logging camp near Missoula. Mother didn't last the winter after. Been on my own since." She sat back on her heels, the heat of the flames warming her face. "That kind of solitude, it doesn't scare you." He leaned against the table, one hand resting on the edge. "It used to feel easier than losing people." Willa didn't reply right away. Her eyes drifted to the cradle. "I used to think I knew what I could endure, but grief's a trickster. It waits until you think you've found your footing, then it knocks you clean over again." Elias stepped forward, crouched beside her, his gaze steady and quiet. "You're still standing," she blinked once. "Barely. Still counts." The fire popped. Somewhere outside, a branch cracked under the weight of snow. She reached for the kettle, poured warmed water into a basin, then dipped a cloth and wrung it out. "I should wash while he sleeps. He's been fussing with a sore belly, I think." Elias stood, handed her a strip of boiled linen from the drying rack without needing to ask. "I'll fetch more water before it freezes over." She watched him step out into the cold. He didn't wear gloves, just tucked his hands into his coat and kept moving like the cold couldn't touch him. She didn't understand that kind of endurance yet, but she was starting to want to. As the days shortened and the wind grew sharper, they fell into rhythm. Willa milked the goat Elias had taken in from a neighbor who'd moved back east. She mended seams with a needle that bit her fingers raw. Elias hunted when the weather allowed, brought back rabbit and once a young buck. his face drawn from the kill but his hands steady. He never spoke of his past unless she asked, and Willa didn't ask much. But sometimes, in the blue hush before dawn, he'd sit at the edge of the bed, boots unlaced, and say something soft and unexpected. She used to hum when it snowed. Said snowfall made the world clean again. Willa knew he meant his mother. She didn't press. She only said, I hum when Caleb's fussy. I think he likes the sound. One evening, while she stitched a patch along the edge of her skirt, Elias came in with frost crusted at the collar of his coat. He removed it, hung it on the peg, and stood there watching her hands move. You ever think about staying? He asked. Her needle paused. You mean here? I mean not having to leave at all. She set the cloth down in her lap. I think about it more than I expected to. His eyes stayed on hers. You already belong, Willa. You and the boy both. She didn't answer right away. She felt the weight of the moment, the way it settled between them like something sacred. I don't want to be someone you took in out of pity, she said. He crossed the room, slow, sat beside her. You never were. She looked down at her hands. I've been a wife, a daughter, a stranger. I don't know who I am now. Elias reached over, took her hand, his palm warm against her chilled fingers. You're a mother. You're a woman who crossed half the country with a newborn and no one to lean on. That's who you are. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. And who are you, Elias Boone? He held her hand tighter. A man who would give everything he has to be worthy of you. They sat in silence, her hand in his. Later, after the lamps were out and the fire had dimmed to embers, Willa stood by the cradle and watched her son sleep. Elias rested on the floor again, wrapped in a quilt. She whispered, You don't have to sleep down there. His eyes opened. You sure? She nodded. The bed's warmer with two. He rose without a word, crossed the room, and lay beside her, careful, respectful. When she turned toward him, he reached for her hand beneath the blanket. She laced her fingers through his. In the dark, she said, What would it mean to take your name? He turned his head toward her, voice low. It'd mean I'd call you mine, and I'd take on you and Caleb both, same as if he were born to me. She breathed in the scent of pine and hearth smoke. Then I want it. He pressed a kiss to her knuckles, slow and sure. I'll make it right by you, Willa, every day to come. The marriage was done quiet, with only the preacher's wife and Elias's old trail partner, Tom Dent, standing witness. The preacher read from his worn book with a voice like cracked stone, and Willa held Caleb close while Elias held her gaze. Her name changed with a single vow, but it felt like a steadier thing, like the ground firming beneath her boots after too long in shifting dust. Afterward, they walked back to the cabin slow, the snow packed tight under their feet. Elias carried Caleb inside, cradling him in one arm while he opened the door with the other, and Willa watched the motion as if it were a promise only she was meant to see. Inside, she removed her gloves and set them near the stove. Elias laid Caleb in the cradle, then turned to her, his hands hesitant for the first time since she'd met him. You all right? He asked. I am, she said, her voice soft. It feels strange that something this big could happen so quietly. Nothing quiet about it to me, he said. Feels like the loudest thing I've ever done. She moved to him then, not because she had to, but because her body sought it the way a root leans toward water. Her arms slid around his waist, and he folded into her like he'd been waiting for the space she made. That night they lay in the bed together, not out of necessity but belonging. Willa traced the edge of his jaw with one finger, her touch light. Did you ever think your life would look like this? She asked. Elias stared at the ceiling for a long moment before answering. I thought I'd die out there one day, maybe under a horse or in a snowdrift. I never thought I'd hear a baby breathing beside me. Willa's voice caught. Neither did I. In December, the storms came harder. Days passed under white skies and thick wind, but the cabin held. Willa learned to bake flatbread with the sour milk and thick flour Elias kept stored in a bin under the floorboard. She bundled Caleb in wool scraps and sang to him in the evenings. Songs her mother had taught her when the world had seemed far simpler. Elias spent hours carving a flat sled from aspen planks, not because they needed it yet, but because he liked to be ready. When he worked, he muttered under his breath, not words but sounds, like a man used to being the only one listening. One afternoon, while she was darning the elbow of his shirt, Willa said, "Tell me something about your father." Elias didn't answer at first. Then, he used to whistle through his teeth when he was working. It'd get louder the longer he went. Sometimes I still hear it when I'm out chopping wood. She looked up from her stitching. Was he kind? Not always, but he tried to be. He had a way of putting his hand on my shoulder when I did something right. Never said much, just that. She nodded. Mine used to read the Bible out loud even when no one was listening, said the words needed air. Caleb made a soft sound from the cradle, and Elias rose to check him. He didn't lift the baby, just ran the backs of his fingers along his cheek, then adjusted the blanket. Willa watched him. "You're good with him." "I think he's good for me," Elias said. By January, the snow was layered deep against the cabin walls. The world outside narrowed to the line of the woods and a sky that bruised purple come dusk. Elias had taken to reading aloud by lamplight, his voice slow and careful. Willa would sit with her feet tucked beneath her, listening while she rocked Caleb, her eyes on Elias's face more than the words. One evening, after he'd finished reading a passage from a worn almanac, Elias closed the book and looked at her. "I've been thinking," he said. She raised her eyebrows. "About what?" "I want to fence in the north pasture come spring, enough ground for a few head of cattle. And maybe a milk cow." She set Caleb gently down in the cradle. "You planning on building a full homestead?" "I'm planning on building a life." Willa crossed to him slowly. "You think we can do that out here?" "I think we already are." She rested her forehead against his. "Then I'll help you. With the fence, with the cow, with whatever comes next." He brushed his lips across her forehead, then her temple. "I know you will." Later that night, with the fire low and the wind pressing hard against the shutters, they lay side by side, warmth shared under the same quilt. Willa turned toward him. "Do you ever worry it won't last?" she whispered. "That something could take it all away?" "I used to," Elias said, "but not now, not with you here." She reached for his hand and placed it over her ribs where her heart beat steady. "Then I'll stay. Every storm, every spring. I'll stay." And in the dark, with the world quiet around them and their child breathing soft just beyond the reach of their hands, Elias Boone held the woman who had asked him only for a blanket and gave her everything. By late February, the snow had begun to pull back from the edges of the fields, revealing frost-bitten grass and the black bones of last summer's thistle. The wind still carried a bite, but the sun had begun to linger longer in the sky. Elias stood by the shed, sharpening the blade of an old drawknife, while Willa rocked Caleb on the porch, wrapped in a shawl she had sewn from a bolt of faded flannel Tom had traded them for a jar of rendered lard. Willa's hands were busier now, calloused where they hadn't been before. She'd taken to mending Elias's tools, cleaning the hinges of the cabin windows with boiled vinegar, and learning the quiet rhythm of the land waking up from winter. "You think the creek will thaw by March?" she asked, her voice carrying just enough to reach him. Elias looked up from the blade. "If the wind stays south, otherwise might be April." She adjusted Caleb in her arms. "I'd like to wash our clothes in running water again." He set the drawknife aside and walked toward her, his boots crunching across the packed earth. "You don't complain," he said, settling beside her on the porch rail. "I was raised not to." She glanced at him. "But I think I'd feel better with the smell of soap on our linens." He gave a short nod. "We'll get there." She shifted Caleb to her shoulder. "I've been thinking," she said, softer. "I'd like to keep a patch for growing, nothing big, just roots, maybe some beans." Elias leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I can fence a corner off for you. South side gets good light. You'll need to turn the soil soon as it softens." "I know how." "My mother kept a garden behind our house in Abilene. She said a woman should grow something with her own hands, even if the world tried to take everything else." He looked at her then, not smiling, not solemn, just steady. "You've got her in you." She didn't answer, only looked out at the slope beyond the cabin, where the snow had shrunk to reveal patches of brown earth and the first signs of rabbit tracks near the tree line. That night, after Caleb had fallen asleep with his fingers curled against Willa's collarbone, Elias pulled a folded paper from the drawer near the stove. He laid it on the table and smoothed the edges. Willa lowered her voice. "What's that?" "Title deed," he said. "For this land. I had it filed before the winter came. Took me years to pay it out." She sat across from him. "It's yours." He shook his head. "It's ours now. I want to add your name to it." She looked at him, hands still. "You want me to hold it with you? I want you to own what we're building. Not just live in it." She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Then I will." They took the deed into town 2 weeks later, bundled in Elias's wagon with Caleb swaddled between them. The road was rough with thaw and ruts, and the mule pulled at a slow, patient pace. Willa hadn't left the cabin since the snow first fell, and the sight of buildings, even sparse and weather-worn, made her chest tighten. Inside the county clerk's office, the man behind the desk looked at her with the kind of lingering pause she'd come to recognize. "You're Mrs. Boone now?" he asked, glancing at the paper Elias slid forward. "I am." He sniffed, dipped his pen, and added her name in looping, black script. "Congratulations," he said, not unkindly, but with the air of someone marking a ledger more than a life. Willa folded the paper herself, slipping it into her satchel as Elias held the door open for her. They walked the boardwalk in silence. A woman across the street carrying a bucket of water paused when she saw them, her eyes resting on Willa's worn coat, then on Caleb's cap. Willa didn't lower her gaze. Elias touched her elbow. "You all right?" she nodded. "It's strange, being seen again." "You don't owe them anything." "I know," Willa said. "But I think I still want to be proud of what they see." Back at the cabin, Willa laid the deed in the drawer beside the cradle, her fingers lingering at the edge. That evening, while Elias ran a whetstone along the edge of his hatchet, Willa sat by the fire with Caleb in her lap and a length of linen pinned to her thigh. "I've been wondering," she said, eyes on her stitches, "about the land past the ridge." Elias didn't look up. "What about it? Does it belong to anyone?" "Not yet. But it's rocky, not good for planting." She nodded, tying off a stitch. "Still, it's beautiful. I walked up there once, just before the snow came. You can see all the way to the butts in the west." He set the hatchet down and leaned back in his chair. "You thinking of building something there?" "Maybe, someday. A place for Caleb when he's grown. I want him to have something of his own." Elias looked at her for a long moment. "You think that far ahead?" "I have to," she said. "It's how I survived this long." He stood and crossed the room. "Then I'll clear the ridge for you come summer. Whatever you want there, we'll make it." Willa looked up at him, her face open, unguarded. "You're the first man who's ever said that and meant it." He brushed a thumb across her cheek. "You're the first woman who's ever made me want to say it." They didn't speak after that, not for a while. The fire cracked and Caleb breathed soft in Willa's arms. Outside, the wind had shifted. It carried the scent of thawing earth and wet pine, the beginning of something new. By early April, the creek had broken free of its ice, running dark and quick in the hollows beneath the ridge. Willa stood knee-deep in the garden bed Elias had fenced for her, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hands sunk into the thawed earth. The chill clung to the soil, but she welcomed it. Life pushed from the bottom up worms, grit, old roots surrendering to the new. Elias worked nearby, splitting cedar rails for the pasture fencing. He paused now and then to glance toward her, his expression unreadable but steady. Caleb slept in his cradle within the cabin, the door propped open so Willa could hear him stir. "You ever plant onions?" she asked, not looking up. Elias leaned on the maul handle. "My mother did, said they kept longer than most." Willa brushed dirt from her palm. "I'm thinking of setting 2 rows deep. If the frost doesn't take them, they'll be ready come high summer." He nodded, then crossed to her, squatting at the edge of the bed. "You want help turning the rest?" She shook her head. "No, I need to do this part myself." He didn't press. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded cloth. "Tom passed through yesterday, left this for Caleb." Said he'd carved it on the trail up from Butte. Willa unfolded the cloth and found a small wooden horse, its edges smooth, saddle etched in shallow lines. She ran her thumb over the curve of its neck. He didn't have to. He said he wanted to, Elias said. Told me he never saw a baby sleep so sound. Willa smiled, tucking the horse into her apron. Well, that's something I'll tell Caleb when he's grown. They worked in silence through the afternoon. Crows cut across the sky in twos. The wind smelled faintly of pine pitch, and somewhere beyond the trees a fox barked once, sharp and brief. Later, Elias walked out to check the line traps he'd set near the south tree line. When he returned at dusk, Willa was by the fire with Caleb in her arms, humming low. Her hair had slipped free of its braid and curled damp at her temples. I found tracks near the far line, Elias said, hanging his coat. Bear, maybe, small one. Willa's brow pinched. Close, not more than half a mile. I'll walk the perimeter at first light. If it's just passing through, we won't see it again, she nodded. I'll keep Caleb close till then. He knelt beside them, touching Caleb's foot through the blanket. You always do. She looked at him for a long moment. Do you miss the road? He shook his head. I never had a reason to stay anywhere before. That's not the same as wanting to leave. Willa shifted Caleb to one arm and reached for Elias's hand. I've been thinking about adding a second bed frame, not for now, for when he's older. Elias's mouth curved faintly. You planning ahead again? Someone has to, she said. I'll cut the timber next week. That night, after the fire had burned down and the cabin sunk into its hush, Willa lay with her head against Elias's chest, his heartbeat slow beneath her cheek. I never thought I'd feel safe again, she murmured. His hand moved to her back, palm warm through the linen. You make this place safe, Willa, not the walls. She looked up at him. Do you still want more? He nodded once. If it's with you? She let out a breath. Then when the ground's ready, I want to plant more than onions and beans. I want to plant a life here. A full one. Elias bent and kissed her, slow and sure, the kind of kiss that didn't rush or ask, just promised. I'll build whatever life you want, he said against her skin. And I'll stay beside you through every part of it. 10 years later, the cabin had grown. A second room stood off the north wall, and the garden had stretched into long rows of corn, squash, and potatoes. The barn housed 2 milk cows, a pair of sturdy draft horses, and a handful of chickens that scratched beneath the eaves. Caleb ran through the yard, tall for his age, his hands calloused from fence work, his hair sun-bleached. The wooden horse still sat on a shelf above his bed, worn smooth from years of handling. Willa stood beside the garden gate, her belly round beneath her apron, one hand resting on the curve of it. She watched her son chase a barking dog through the grass and smiled. Elias joined her, wiping his hands on a cloth, his shirt damp from work. She kicking again? He asked, nodding toward her belly. Like she's already trying to plant her feet, he laughed, quiet and rich. She'll be stubborn then, she'll be hers, Willa said. And ours. Elias wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her against his side. You ever think how far we've come? He asked. She leaned into him. Every single day. They stood there as the sun dropped behind the ridge, the land golden and wide before them, their life rooted deep in soil they'd turned with their own hands. And nothing, not grief, not winter, not the long miles behind them, could touch what they'd built together.